Hi, this is Paul. After Synod 2023, I made a video that I entitled Reverend Vander Ploeg Goes to Synod, and sort of a riffing on Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, because at Synod 2023, in the midst of all of the drama about the human sexuality report and all of that fight that was going on in the denomination, Scott Vander Ploeg from Port St. Lucie, Florida, comes to Synod and basically bends Synod to his will. And this is something that happens very seldom, but Scott pulled it off in 2023. And Scott came back to Synod this year. And in many ways, Scott did again in this year what he did in that Synod. The question isn't so much whether Scott Vander Ploeg can bend Synod to his will. The questions run deeper in terms of how does the Christian Reformed Church work? What is the Christian Reformed Church? What is the relationship between, I call it the cyborg, which is the Christian Reformed Church has this organic body, which is, on this channel we talk about bodies and subtle bodies and spiritual bodies and all those kinds of things, which is this body, which is the Christian Reformed Church. And then there's now we usually at Synod use the language of Office of General Secretary. There's the Council of Delegates. There's the offices and the staff. And of course, there's offices and staff in local churches all around. Well, the decline of the Christian Reformed Church numerically continues, and in fact is accelerating. And so I'll first drop this first speech from Scott here into this video here.
Scott, Ruben Aguilar, Michael Nanninga.
Scott Vander Ploeg, Class of Southeast. I'm standing to speak in favor of recommendation number 1. Tongue-in-cheek, first of all, I always love it when Synod commends our classes. Thank you very much. But maybe more importantly, I want to just speak in favor of supporting Resonate. I think because of the decrease in funding, they're struggling to figure out how to make budget adjustments that's going to work toward church planning. And I know they're working as hard as possible to make churches and church plants flourish. So I just want to make sure that we understand. The director just spoke about how hard the last 6 months have been for them, and I think it's important for us to really hear that. Though I'm speaking in favor, I have a little bit of a concern, and my concern is that with regard to this overture, we're going to say some great words together, but we won't have tangible action steps. If you'll permit me with some numbers, I was a math major in college. It was in 2017 that Classes Southeast first presented an overture about denominational decline. We had been tracking the previous 2 decades. From 1996 to 2006, our denomination had declined in membership by just less than 7%, from 292,000 to 272,000. But the decade leading up to 2017, from 2006 to 2016, we doubled our rate of decline to 13.3%, and we fell to 236,000. When we submitted this overture in 2017, we had a warning that, boy, if we just keep on this pace, we could fall as low as 207,000 by 2026 and 184,000 by 2036. And our overture contained the following words: if these projections prove to be anywhere near accurate, it is certain that this decline will have a profound impact on the entire denomination and all its ministries. It's difficult to see how, if nothing changes, the CRC's kingdom impact will not be severely reduced. It's now 2025, and it's publicly available information on our CRCNA website that we have fallen below our projection for 2036 already. Our membership now stands at 183,710 members. So in less than a decade, we fell lower than our 2-decade projection at the time. Underneath that, if you go back just a little more than a decade, you'll find that we have about 1,000 churches in our denomination. We're averaging about 3 new members by evangelism per church per year. But in the past 4 years, we're averaging just less than 1. So this decline is going to continue. The budget cuts are going to continue. And at least for me, I was inspired by the story of Reverend Brink, who, with financial support from Oakdale Park, came knocking on doors, and look at all that's happened. Yeah. And I think we need some action steps to make sure that there'll continue to be financial support. People keep knocking on doors. Thank you.
Now, as you can see, the Christian Reformed Church continues in decline, and the Christian Reformed Church has been losing about 6,000 members a year. And the numbers that Scott gave do not include the disaffiliations. Now, we don't really know what size this loss will be from the disaffiliations. Could be 8,000 to 10,000 people, could be 20 to 30 churches, something in that number, probably. But in any case, the Christian Reformed Church is losing members quickly. The Christian Reformed Church is aging. Over the next 10 to 15 years, there are going to be many churches that die. And that's going to, while this discussion here is about money, denominational money for church planting, and because the denominational money is declining, partly due to the decline in numbers of people, at the classical level, it's quite likely that classes are going to be receiving money from churches that are closing. And because often when a church closes and the property is sold, the money will go to classis, and that money will be used for church planting. And so that will be a big conversation. Now, what I want you to see is how Scott leads, because this is a really good example of a great leader. Because you'll notice in that first speech, Scott gave the bad news. Now, in this next speech, but even when he gave the bad news, notice how he was speaking in favor of the motion. And now I'm going to take the elements of that debate, just similar to what I did with the banner debate. I'm going to take the elements of that debate and I'm going to put it at the end of this video if you want to watch the whole thing through. Now, Sam E. From Michigan, as a comment on the banner video, said, really encouraged people to watch that, because even though it seems kind of boring and you might not know the people, if you begin to understand how that thing is working, it's really rather interesting sort of watching the ups and downs of it. And unlike me, who had to sit in that chair and try to be good the whole time, you can watch it while you're doing other productive things like doing the dishes or cutting the lawn or doing some other things. And so if you want to get a sense of, like I said, sort of the sideboard, the denominational offices, the staff, if you want to get a sense of the body underneath, you can listen to Synod, because you'll hear just a whole variety of voices. It almost sounds like a comments section. So what you'll notice in that first speech that Scott gives, he gives the bad news. And he was, he's ready for that speech. And then in this next speech, he gives the good news.
Scott Vander Ploeg, Andrew Littleton, Scott Elgersma.
Scott Vander Ploeg, class of Southeast U.S. I'd like to stand to speak in favor of this motion. Previously, I gave the bad news about our decline, and I did so because I believe we have to act with urgency. I'd like to stand up and speak toward the good news. And I will say, it's been referenced several times by the president, that I do intend to provide a floor motion to get to some more concrete action steps. And I'd like to do that after we vote in favor of this motion. Here's what I'd like to say. As the Christian Reformed Church, when it comes to church planting, we don't lack anything. We can do it. And I know. I've been a pastor now 21 years in the place that has been named by various people as the most unchurched area of the United States. And we have thriving ministry. We have the gospel, which the book of Romans says is the power of God for salvation. And the Christian Reformed Church, I believe, has a robust articulation of faith that our secular world needs, filled with theological depth. We're well positioned, and we're ready to take on the rising tide of secularism. Our agencies are fantastic. Our denomination has a kind of sophistication, and we're ready. We have a tremendous history of leadership development that we can build on. I don't want anyone, because of what I said earlier, to despair that, oh, this isn't something we can do. We can do it. We do need a plan, and we need some action steps. Of course, denominational decline will be a motivator. I think it should be. But I hope that we're motivated for church planting more than just survival. I love the gospel. I was a broken person, riddled with sin, living in rebellion to God, and there were CRC pastors and people that came into my life to share the good news of Jesus. I'm just captivated by his life, his death, his resurrection. By grace, I was reborn, I was made alive, I was forgiven, I was set free, I was given a place in his church, and I'm motivated by a world around me that's lost, broken, hurting, and I believe that the church is the hope of the dying world. So that's our second motivation, the gospel. But even more than that, I think we should be captivated by our beholding the glory of the resurrected Jesus. Think of who he is. Think of the power he has. Think of what he can do through us. I think most of us are familiar with praying the Lord's Prayer.
Thank you.
Am I done? Okay. I'll be back.
We don't doubt it.
Now, part of what you should notice about how Scott works is, in each case, he usually sends an overture ahead of time. Because he sends the overture to Synod. Well, what is an overture? Well, if a Christian Reformed Church member or a church council or a classis wants to ask Synod to do something, you can send what's called an overture. And in each case, Scott's classis has been sending overtures to Synod to say, numerical decline needs to be addressed. Numerical decline needs to be addressed. The church needs revitalization in terms of evangelism and church planting and discipleship. We need to focus on this more thoroughly. And again, in 2023, that was a very big deal because all the focus was on the question of human sexuality. And so, Scott's MO is pretty clear now, is that he sends an here as classis, sends an overture to Synod, and then it goes into these advisory committees, and I talked about those advisory committees a little bit. Those advisory committees are to basically take all of this stuff, digest it somehow, and give a recommendation to Synod on how to act with respect to that overture and that advisory committee. And so, generally speaking, what often happens, especially with something as audacious and ambitious and aspirational as Scott is sending in, it usually gets blunted. And so in this case, and again, I'm gonna attach it, the advisory committee report, wants to thank and say things like church planting is a priority and we're serious about it, but there's no money in the budget for church planting grants this year, and so church plants will be missing that money. And so then one would have to ask off the top of my head, in something like an $18 million budget for the denomination as a whole, and that number might be wrong, so don't hold me to it. You can't find any money for church planting grants. How much of a priority is it? And you'll hear the director of Resonate. Now, Resonate, a number of years ago, they combined Christian Reformed Home Missions and Christian Reformed World Missions. Home Missions did church planting, World Missions did overseas mission, and they combined it into one agency, and they entitled it Resonate. And so you'll hear the director of Resonate say, church planting is a priority. Now, I think church planting should be a priority. I think church planting is a way in which, especially here in North America, the church is renewed. And I know this is going to be something that, let's say, Catholics and Orthodox really look at me as a Protestant, even though Orthodox are planting new churches. Catholics already have quite a few churches around. But church planting, especially for Protestant churches, is a really important thing because the church culture gets renewed and new methods come about and different people and niches of people can be met and addressed. So you get this amazing and I think beautiful diversity of churches with church planting. But the thing that church planting requires is leadership, training, and development. And really the key to church planting is leadership training and development. And as was noted, there were rather few candidates coming out of seminary. There were 49 Christian Reformed ministers retiring and less than 20 new ministers coming in, and a number of them had been spoken for. But part of this is the fact that all of us should remember that 3 years ago was 2022. Things were sort of in the midst of COVID then, and it took a little while for formal education to really get going. And they're saying that next year there'll be more candidates and seminarians. And this gets into the question of a question that Orthodox, Catholics, Protestant, all churches are dealing with in terms of ask the Lord of the harvest to send forth workers. We need more and better church leaders, church planters, leaders at every level. And again, this is part of the reason why I think Scott is a great example of a great leader, because he knows how to sort of move that body. The question, of course, is going to be, can he move the whole body? So what happens is that if you watch the proceedings, everything just kind of grinds to a halt and it gets frustrating, and they have to do some editing of the advisory committee report. And then Scott is like, well, I'm going to put an amendment. And, after watching him carefully in Synod 2023, I pretty much knew what was coming, which was Scott sends an amendment, he goes to Synod, the advisory committee blunts the amendment, Scott is going to make sure that the heart of this amendment goes through and gets passed, which is in fact what happens.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. Scott Vander Ploeg, class of Southeast U.S. And I would like to introduce a motion from the floor. And I'll just say a few things as sort of my preamble, which is this is a difficult situation, so I don't pretend to have all the answers. I don't know that any one of us does. Also, I do feel, as I think now that's been expressed, we need to have some more concrete action. And I want to make sure to just say this, that although my floor motion is going to direct the General Secretary and agencies to do something, that I think, our General Secretary can't just wish it and say it so. Actually, all of us as churches, as classes, will have to step up to the plate, so to speak. Anyway, I wonder if it's going to come up on the screens.
Sure, it's on the way. There it is.
Okay, here's my floor motion. Instruct the Office of General Secretary to coordinate with agencies and the classes to develop a vision, plan, strategy, and financial proposal for church planting for the CRCNA for the next decade. This plan should specify the number of church plants we aspire to plant, the strategy necessary to raise up leaders for this movement, and the resources necessary to carry out this plan, specifically financial, but also otherwise. This plan should contemplate and propose how we as a denomination will secure the resources necessary to carry out this plan. The General Secretary shall publish and set this plan before the churches by next year's Synod, and I included some grounds. 1, church planting is an important aspect of fulfilling the Great Commission and therefore is vital to the mission of our denomination. 2, this is a necessary part of developing our church renewal strategy. 3, other denominations regularly develop such plans in order to inspire and challenge their respective churches. So moved.
I hear some support.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to have any comments at all from the committee?
Like I said, the recommendations we had were the best ideas we had in the room when we were dealing with it. We knew, in many respects, they were insufficient. If we'd have had this, I suspect we would have adopted it. And so I think we're inclined to receive it as friendly if that helps. Or it's just a separate motion.
I think technically you can't receive it as friendly because it's substantial enough and the rest of the committee can't speak
Great.
into it.
Then it's unfriendly, but we welcome it
it's not-
anyway.
it's not- you don't have to speak against it either. But they get to decide and not you individually.
Great,
So.
sounds good.
Okay, that has received lots of support. And so that's the motion now on the floor.
Just mention one more thing, which is this motion recognizes that what's happened this year in the budget kind of is what it is. And I understand why Resonate did the very best they possibly could. But I think moving forward, we can't stay here. We've got to find a way forward, which is the reason for this motion, is let's start putting that plan together. And like I said, although it directs the General Secretary and the agencies towards something, I think it's the churches that have got to come together. I believe we value this. We can do it, and we should concentrate on it.
Okay.
So Scott wins again. But that doesn't mean that the Christian Reformed Church is really going to get serious about church planting, about evangelism, about discipleship. But that doesn't mean Scott shouldn't do what he does. And Scott's going to continue to do what he does. And Scott's not going to leave the church alone. But again, what's so beautiful about the way that Scott does this is it would be really easy, and in fact, if you look at some of the other speeches, people sort of have this tone of criticism, of browbeating, and it's basically going to be something like, beatings will continue until morale improves. And that's often the way these conversations go. But Scott doesn't work like that, which to me shows how he's such an effective leader. He can bring the hard news, which is numerical decline, but then he also brings, well, here's what we can do about it. Let's do this. Gets people energized, gives them a positive note, and then, well, again, but if you turn Synod, it doesn't necessarily mean that the end result, which is what you want, which is more church planting, more leadership development, more discipleship, more evangelism, is going to get there. When the denomination merged home missions and world missions, there was a lot of consternation, I think, in both the home missions and world missions communities. And I would imagine that the numbers of world missions are quite a bit lower than they were when they merged, and home missions. Now, this is in the context of, again, general downsizing. So I can't speak to whether or not the merger in Resonate was a good move or not. But one thing is true is that if you have sort of a body and it has a singular focus and a purpose, it's kind of a lot easier to keep that focus and the purpose sort of as the main thing. And, well, we'll see what comes of this. But again, I just wanted to give you an update about Reverend Vander Ploeg going to Synod again and winning. So here's the, I'm just going to let it run, but I put it together from a couple different videos. Here's how here's how it went on the floor. And if you want to get a master class in leadership and how you can get something through an ecclesiastical body like a synod, Scott will show you.
Midwestuary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss, with special guests Cale Zeldin, Paul Vanderploeg, Rod Dreher, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Pajot. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates. Minutes.